Welcome back to Tezos X-plained. Today I'm here for a very exciting conversation with Arthur, talking about the uranium price feed that's recently been launched. Arthur, why don't you tell me more about why this was needed and kind of what started the conversation into developing the price feed?
Right now, I would say there's not a good reference price for uraniums. You can get some prices from Numerico, for example, and you'll get maybe a price today, and it kind of reflects what the OTC market is doing. You know, the OTC is over the counter. This is like these huge trades, for example, that happen at Cameco, and you'll get a sense of where the market is, but it's not very frequent. If you want to build a liquid marketplace or for uranium, you can look at that, but you're going to have a little bit of chicken and egg where you don't know where the price necessarily is, so it's hard to provide liquidity. But if you don't price liquidity, you also not going to get price discovery. So how do you bootstrap that? There are actually other venues where price discovery for uranium can happen, even though they don't trade uranium, and I think that's quite interesting. The first thing to look at is you have the spot ETF that trades. Now, it doesn't track uranium perfectly, but it still will move with uranium. And so if you have some uranium moving news, or if sentiment changes, you might see that being reflected in the ETF prices before you see it being reflected on the OTC market, or at least you'll see it with more granularity. There's also other funds that track it. And then, like, stepping back a little bit, you also have uranium miners. What this feed does is that it takes all these different price feed, all these different assets, put it all together, and then extract out of it a best guess for what is the price of uranium. What should the price of uranium be to explain all of these market movements? From a statistical point of view, it's a filter, right? So you have noisy observation, and the filter does that, it gets this price. And that gives an indication, and you really do a best effort in some sense at gathering all the information. And the best part is you can throw anything into it. So if you add, for example, Forex, and very low correlation, but still correlation. Even if you throw other commodities like gold, very small correlation, but still some correlation. Why? Because maybe you capture some move in the price that have to do with a change in the price of the dollar. And that is actually lets you construct a 24/7 feed.
Why was this important, other than from a market perspective? What specifically, and the press release talked about Etherlink and Tezos technology, why was this critically important for what we're trying to do in the uranium market?
Well, I would disagree that it was critically important. I think it is useful. I think it's extremely useful, but I would dispute words like need or critically important. Like I said, it's useful because it helps bootstrap liquidity.
What are some of the other impacts that you envisage this price feed having, and where else do you think it could be used?
You can potentially use it for derivative pricing. So if you want to build a perpetual contract, futures contract, you can also use it if you want to build borrowing against uranium on a Tezos blockchain, and you want to have an oracle that gives you like a fair price. Today is not yet the place where price discovery happens for uranium.
Cool.
So but if you gather all this information and put it there, that's a good first step at trying to make that happen.
What was the role that the various teams across the Tezos ecosystem played in developing this, and what was your role as well specifically?
Well, I do actually have expertise in building this type of things. One of my several jobs over the years, at one point I worked for Goldman Sachs, and I did some foreign ETF market making. Foreign ETF is an ETF where the underliers are not necessarily open during the same hours. So, you have a US ETF that has Chinese stocks. So Chinese market is closed. How do you price ETF? And one thing that you might do is say, well, I don't know what these stocks are worth, but I have proxies that I can look for. I see other things in the market. There are techniques which essentially lets you take disparate feeds of information and try to reconstruct an asset based on cross-market correlations. I think I wrote the initial filter, and then engineering teams worked to put it into production by receiving data from the right sources and hardening it and making it publish on a chain.
So let's flip that dynamic slightly. What are some of the problems in the current market that this helps address or could have an impact in addressing?
I think price discovery. You have price discovery happening potentially in different markets, but there's not one place that really aggregates this information, and so you can help price formation this way.
So you've given us a good overview of initially what went into the filter. That's a great first version. What are the future phases or future evolution of the price feed look like from your perspective?
Yeah, that's great, because indeed that's the first version, and it's an improvement on anything that's out there. There's a few more things we can do. One is adding more assets. There are many assets which are potentially correlated with uranium. So I said you can throw anything at it, It's not 100% true, because if you just give this thing the entire stock market, it would potentially overfit. Like, the noise would confuse it. But there's a lot of assets which are potentially helpful that we're not using at the moment. So I'm thinking of other commodities which have 24/7 markets, and I'm thinking of currencies in particular. But the second thing is, we have some fees right now which are delayed. Given the frequency at which Uranium reprices at the moment, it's not a huge issue, but improving the quality of the feeds and the speed of the feeds could make a difference. And then there's the filter itself. So right now, the filter itself treats the price that it gets from, say, Numerico as authoritative. So it's like, when you get this quote, that's the price of Uranium right now, and the feed cannot disagree with it. So at some point, you can let it disagree with it. And you can be with a band, and it might say like, well, I disagree within 1% or 2%, because it happens, right? The markets are not perfectly arbitraged, and there may be some difference. And if the filter performs very, very well, you may have enough confidence in the information you're getting from other markets to actually take a slightly different view. Ultimately, you can measure the performance of your price feed. If the price feed does a good job at predicting itself, then it's a good price feed. In the long run, it's not going to stray too far from the reference price. So once that's established, the lower the volatility of the price feed, the better of a job it is doing at being a self-predictor. At some point, of course, right now the volume is slow, but at some point, the price on on Uranium.io and the price that's happening in the trading of the token actually also becomes a part of the feed. Right now, it would mostly be listening to the feed, but at some point, it can feed into the feed and actually feed where some price discovery happens.
And you mentioned an interesting point there around other commodities. So we obviously know Uranium.io is out there. This was a supporting factor as part of Uranium.io. How do you see the evolution of Uranium.io and other commodities being enabled on Etherlink and within the Tezos ecosystem going?
There are many other commodities, and the same principle can be applied to other commodities. Now, we're lucky with uranium because there's a bunch of uranium miners which are traded in different stock exchanges around the world. Having different markets cover different time zones is quite useful here. For other metals, it might be, sources of information might be scarcer, but you can feed uranium prices in it. It's not going to be perfect, but again, you don't need 100% correlation to help. You don't need a 90% correlation, sometimes even a 10% correlation. Well, it's still an indication that something is moving, something is happening.
Thank you, Arthur, for being here. Super interesting discussion, and looking forward to the evolution of Uranium.io, supported by this price feed and anything else that's coming out in the future.